I hope you're ready to make stuff in Rive because we're about to right now. Welcome to the 3-part tutorial of how to set up a playable piano in Rive. We're going to cover everything from designing, prepping for animation, setting up the state machine, doing a few advanced state machine tricks, and of course adding the sound events to really make it all come together.
So I was on this community page and I saw this Family of G animated interactive musical experiment. And the chords change with the hover, and then you can hear her play the guitar on click. So it's a really quite incredible little sound experiment. So it made me wonder whether we could create a playable piano in Rive. We're just gonna do everything in Rive. We'll start with a new file. This is my favorite place to design anyway, so might as well do it in Rive. Let's make it 1080 by 500, maybe a little taller. I think having like a dark background, almost like we're in a chamber orchestra or something like that would be kind of nice. Something like this, and then let's make this white a little bit more like this. Maybe I'm just a sucker for dark backgrounds. You know, I think it'll actually be fun to start with the piano. So I'm just starting with a rectangle for the piano. So I duplicated that rectangle for underneath, and then we're just gonna make it dark like that. This can even be probably pretty dark. I wonder what happens if we do like a blue keyboard. So just as a quick note, I recorded this on the fly. So I didn't practice doing the process first. So I really am just figuring it out as I go. I wanted to do it that way, and I wanted to keep it that way because I did want you to see how I approach the design process and how I solve the problems that sort of come up as I go. Sometimes it just helps to see somebody run into the problem, run into the wall, and figure out how they're going to get around it. So I thought it would be helpful to see how I mess up sometimes and how I go about fixing problems when I run into them or when I create them for myself. Okay, I'm just messing with some colors here. I'm just trying to figure out if I can find some colors that I like. Maybe we'll just give it a little bit of like some lighting hits here on the sides. We're going to duplicate that. Put this one on the other side. It's kind of cool that it disappears into the environment there. So maybe I will add one more. I don't know. I made this rectangle and I started messing with colors and the background colors and stuff. And I'm just trying to get into the mood here of making a piano. A dark to light gradient for the top one is giving it a nice surface, I guess, like a nice smooth surface. Really, we're going to be cutting out of this anyway. How big do we want these keys to be, I guess? Let's try it out. Let's just get there. So if we're doing a standard C to C keyboard, we need to have enough room for 12 keys. And that's only 8 of these types of keys. I need to start with the artboard, I think. So there would be white keys and black keys. And the black keys will just cut into the white keys. I just want there to be just a slight, it just doesn't have to be a lot. It just needs to be a little bit of color play happening. And that way it just gives it a little bit of a shiny feel to it, right? I'm gonna make this a custom path only so that I can turn these into rounded corners. I don't think the tops need to be. They can just be sharp corners at the top. And now I'm going to make an extrusion for this as well. I'm going to start nesting my artboard in here just so I can see how it's. This is the new artboard. This is going to be the piano. So in order to do a nested artboard of this onto my scene, I have to have this scene artboard selected. And now if I click nested artboard, it should give me the white key. There we go. So this needs to have a fully transparent background. And now I can kind of position this how I want it. All right, so now I can start to mess with colors, I think. I'm gonna rename this top part, top key, or white key top, white key side. All right, so now we have one white key, and I'm just going to duplicate this artboard 7 more times. A little bit of space in between, not a lot. So sometimes if I wanted to make a cut out of a shape, I would just take this into Figma real quick and then make the shape that I want. bring it back into Rive. But in this case, I think I can just create a new shape because I'm just going to make a black rectangle that goes right here. Because the black rectangle will do the same thing as what a cut would do. It's operating the same way. It looks like I've cut something out of my keyboard now. So this is all I really need, I think. And now let's turn that keyboard back on. And I think I want to bring these up a bit. Okay, so now we have ourselves kind of a base keyboard, which is pretty cool, right? And we just took a few shapes. We got one shape here, one shape here. I've just duplicated the same two shapes for every key, and then I've got a black shape underneath it to sort of separate it from the keyboard and give it a little bit of an inset into the keyboard. Okay, so let's name our layers real quick. We've all seen a piano probably, but it's just good to remember as you're like creating stuff like this how it actually works. So on the key of C, which will be the bottom note, we have in between C and D and between D and E these black keys. That's what we have to do. We have to figure out how thick we want these black keys to be. But really, it's just going to be a matter of me making a new artboard that's sort of the right thickness in between these two. But I think I can just split the difference here. So I'm going to make a new shape, and that's going to determine the size that I want my artboard to be. Yeah, right here. All right, so now I know what width I need it to be and height, and we know what position it needs to be. So I'm just going to call this a placeholder rectangle. So for this artboard, we're going to make it 57 wide, and what was it tall? 149. We'll just call it 150, and this will be our black key. So now we don't need this anymore because we're just going to put the black key in there. This can have a background of black because it's just going to be a nested artboard. So the black can be right there as the background, but I need to now create some keys that look like these black keys. So let's start designing. So we're going to do the same thing we did with the white keys, where we take this bottom two corners here and we're going to give them some rounded corners. Okay, so let's make the black key black on top. So the sides look darker actually, but still not quite fully black. So let's see what we can do here. Still trying to get that perfect look for the top of the key, for the black key. That's not too bad. But for this bottom, I do want to add a couple of those shiny spots. And so we'll do that with a radial gradient. All right, and so now we can go back to the keyboard. This is a fun part. We're going to design the keyboard. We're almost finished designing the keyboard portion, which is cool. I think we could even add things like an on and off button. As I design stuff like this in Rive, I start to think about, oh, what other kind of interactions can I add to this? How many buttons can I add? I need to have a power button now, and the power button needs to be next to a volume button, and the volume can go up and down. Sliders, we can have little sliders, and maybe there's a knob that changes the sound. Maybe it'll be a cat keyboard, and instead of just being a cat keyboard that makes cat sounds when you press it, it can turn into a cat, and there will be whiskers that pop out, and there will be ears that come out. Rive will let you do that. That's just where my mind goes when I'm playing with Rive. This is like my happy place. You need to make sure when you're adding your nested artboards that you're in the correct scene. So let's call this the piano scene full. And then I'm going to be in the scene now when I do my nested artboard. Click it here, and then we'll do the black key. If this is C, D, E, then F, G, H. One more time. If this is C, D, E, then F, G, A, then we would need to skip a key here because between E and F there is no black key. So they're supposed to be the same width at the top. Not ideal. But we're just going to do it like this. We're going to make each of these 85%, and then we'll split these up. Hey, we have ourselves a nice little mini piano. All right. So for the first part of this tutorial series, I'm just going to add a little bit of animation to those keys, because that's kind of one of the great things about nested artboards is that you can do the animation one time, but then the interaction that you add to that animation, say if you wanted to hover and then it does a little shine on it, and then if you click it, it presses down, let go and it comes back up, you can do that one time on just your key nested artboard. That interaction will copy across all the other instances of your nested artboard. So let's try it out. So in design mode, we've done all these keys. We're just gonna go now onto the black key and the white key, and we're gonna add some animation. So we gotta click over to the animate tab. All right, so we've created this timeline, and this is just called press down. But before I animate this timeline, I wanna make another timeline that's just the not pressed. And the reason I wanna do that is because the state machine is going to read all the keys across all the states. It's going to try its best to figure out which key to move to and move from. Think of the state machine as sort of like Google Maps or Apple Maps, whatever. If you're looking for directions, you can put in the location, but if you want directions, if you want the map to actually tell you which way to go, it needs to know where you are to start. So in the state machine, you do need to create a kind of an initial state, or the idle state, or the not moving, the not pressed version. Because the keyframes that you set there are going to end up informing how it's going to move from that key to whatever other states that you want. I don't know, I thought that was a pretty good analogy. Let's tell the state machine with our first timeline of not pressed that this is where we want our top of our key to start, right here. So I added a Y keyframe. You can see it's right here in our timeline. Y position is 169.5. And then this is the fun part. I don't even have to animate at all. I can just go down to the pressed down state and we'll add a keyframe here. And all I have to do is actually drag it in the Y down to, let's say, right about here. So it's not quite all the way. It's giving a little bit of a sliver there at the bottom of the key. And I do want it to be on frame 0, the very first frame. It doesn't matter how long these timelines are because these are just going to end up being states. Pressed and not pressed. In fact, let's make it a little higher. I want it to have a little bit more thickness than that. Not pressed, pressed. So it's still in this white key artboard. Let's go to the state machine and let's start adding a little bit of logic to this. When we start, I'm going to have it in its not pressed state, not the pressed down state. So on entry, I want it to go to not pressed. From not pressed, we want to add a press down timeline here, that when something is pressed right here, and this is where we add a condition. So this is where we have to sort of think like a programmer or a coder, right? How do we get an animation to trigger when something is pressed? There's a couple of things that we're going to talk about here, and one's called the input, the other is called the listener. You need both, basically, in order to change what animation is playing at whatever time in Rive. Let's create the input first. There's 3 types. There's a number, a Boolean, and a trigger. A number allows you to create any number of instances that you can count up to, or like if there's a lot of different animations that you want to go to switch between, it's almost like a switch. And then a Boolean is just a simple yes or no. Is it on? Is it off? So it's basically like a number, but you're just giving it a 0 or a 1 or 1 or a 2 or whatever. Is it true? Is it not true? True or false? And then a trigger is I want this to happen, and then I want it to kind of just be I'm triggering an event. I'm triggering a sound. So it's great for sound effects. It's great for quick things that need to just animate whenever something happens. So, but it doesn't need to switch something on or off. It doesn't have to stay in that state. It just needs to trigger an event. Okay, so in this case, we want it to be a Boolean because it's pressed or not pressed, right? So let's do that. Let's call this pressed. And then we've got this little checkbox that basically is telling Rive whether it's true or false. So that's the first thing we need in order to create the conditions by which Rive will tell us which animation to play. Now, under listeners, we want to create a listener for an object in this scene. So we're going to tell Rive that we want to put a listener on this key. When you click the key, you can go down to this plus button and it'll add a listener to the white key top. And I'm going to call it the white key press listener. On the right, this is where the properties panel will show you that you're working on the listener. And you can change the listener type to pointer enter, pointer exit, pointer down, pointer up, or pointer move. And in our case, we want it to be pointer down to tell it that it's pressed. And then we can set the input of pressed to true. It's that simple. And then we're going to do it again for white key lift. And this will be when the pointer is up. We'll set the pressed to false. So these little arrows in between all the little nodes inside of the state machine are where you would put things like event triggers or conditions. And so the condition is what tells Rive, hey, don't do this until this. Basically, that's what this over here is. This little thing that says conditions, there's no conditions added yet. Same with this one. So the little quirk about Rive is that it's going to work so quickly if you press play on the state machine that it'll go straight from entry all the way through to press down, because there's no time between these keyframes. I haven't added any duration of these transitions. I haven't added any exit times. So it's just going to go from key to key almost instantaneously. You would not even see the top state before it goes to the press state. So that's why we need to add a condition here so that it's going to stay not pressed until this happens. So over here, we can grab this transition, and under conditions, we'll add under pressed needs to be true for it to go to press down. So now I also want to drag another line back to not pressed. This will create another transition back to not pressed, but we have to also add that condition back that says pressed is false. Otherwise, once we press it, it stays pressed. So let's try it out. There we go. We've created a nice little easy button press here, but there's a couple more things that we can do. We can add a little bit of interpolation and timing so that the press down has a little bit more weight to it. So I'd like to do that. I'd like to certainly add, let's say 120 milliseconds. It's in milliseconds, you know, it is what it is. You just have to sort of play around with it a bit and find the right timing. But I also want to add a little bit of a curve to it. So we're going to hold shift to grab this, and then I'll make it go really nice and smooth into it. And then let's do another 100, maybe 100 milliseconds on the way up. And this one will be smoother on this end. Here we go. It's a little slow. Let's make it about half. So 60, and then we'll do 30 milliseconds on the way up. So let's do the same thing on this black key. And remember that each artboard has its own set of animation timelines and state machine. So because of that, we need to do the same thing where we're going to tell our state machine where our starting point is. So we'll call this the black key. What do we call the other one? Not pressed. We'll call this black key not pressed. And we'll add a little keyframe there for the top of the black key's Y position. Let's add another timeline. We'll call it black key pressed. And let's just animate it down a little bit. Drag it down to where it needs to be. Right here is fine. Okay, so rather than have this whole key pressed down like this, I wonder if I should just animate the bottom two vertices going down. I'm gonna try that here. So I'll delete the keyframe for this top of the black key. And we're gonna go into the edit mode for these vertices. I'm gonna key these vertices for the top on the not pressed. And then let's go back to the black key pressed, and with these vertices still selected, I'm just gonna drag them down. Uh-oh. So I can't do that because the gradient ends right here. So if I drag the vertices down, it's going to pass where that gradient ends. So instead, I think what I'll do, I'm just gonna have this go above the artboard so that when we push it down, it doesn't disappear, but it just looks like it pulls down a little bit. Let's just see how that looks. All right, so inside of the artboard, it looks like it's going off the edges. I do want it to clip. I'm still just testing this out. I don't want it to be, let's turn off the top group so I can see where the edges are. We don't want to see it, so we'll turn the layer off. I do want this top key to clip to that shape. So let's try that. There we go. I've created a clipping shape for that top key, which goes off the canvas now. So if I grab this top group and I scale it down, it still looks like it's gonna be there at the top. Okay, so that's what we'll do. The not press animation, let's add a keyframe in the Y. And on the pressed animation, we'll add another keyframe right about there. Let's add that logic to it. On this black key top group, we're going to add a listener, and we'll call this black key press down. Do another one that's black key lift up. It's going to be a pointer down. We need to set the inputs. So black key pressed. Question mark. Is it true or false? On press down, it's true. On lift up, it's false. Okay, great. So let's just try it out. We've got it's going to go to the not pressed state immediately. And then we'll go to pressed. And we'll add that interaction. The condition should be true. And then we'll go back if it's, oops. And we'll go back if it's false. And we'll add, let's go back to our other state machine to figure out what our timings should be. 60 on the way down. You know what? I thought about that later, and I thought it's actually more like it should go faster down and then slower up, I think. So let's try that. We'll do a 30 down and then 60 milliseconds up. And we'll make this one a little bit more like that. All right, so now we'll go back to this state machine, and we'll fix these up as well. The duration down should be 30, and we'll just make it a nice cubic curve. 60 on the way up, cubic curve. And now let's try it out. This one's working just fine. Dun. Then we need to switch our state machine up here to make sure we can try out the black key. Ding, 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 ding. Hey, that's working out. Okay.
That'll be the end of this part of the tutorial. On the next part, you're going to see how I set up the state machine, and then I set up the parent artboard to pick up the inputs from the nested artboards, which is how you're going to get those keys to actually interact in the main artboard. The reason I stopped it here, though, was because I ran into a problem, and maybe some of you already have too. The hitboxes overlap on the black keys and the white keys. And so I go about fixing that in the next tutorial. But I'm going to put a challenge out there for you. So between this week and next week, when I upload the next part of this tutorial, I want to see if you can solve the challenge. How do you make sure that the white keys and the black keys don't have overlapping hitboxes? I'm going to show you how to do it on the next tutorial, but I kind of want to see if you can figure it out for yourself. After that, we'll add the sound events that make it sound like a piano. We're going to change up the colors a little bit on the keys when they get pressed, and then we're going to add some note names coming up off of the keys. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for more Rive content.